The morning Dad died, the house fell silent in a way it never had before. Nora stood in the kitchen, clutching her coffee mug, watching the sun crawl across the ceramic tile. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from grief alone, but from the weight of what she knew was coming. The will. Their father had promised to make things right after a lifetime of imbalance. She was the eldest, the one who had stayed behind to care for him when his kidneys started to fail, the one who sacrificed a career, a relationship, and sometimes her own dignity to be a daughter he could depend on. But Grace, her younger sister, had always been the favorite. Beautiful, manipulative, and calculating beneath that sun-kissed, magazine-ready exterior. She had spent years flitting between men, careers, and continents, appearing at family events just long enough to take the best photos, tell the most impressive lies, and disappear again with their father's doting gaze chasing her out the door. Nora thought maybe, just maybe, the will would reflect the reality they had lived, that for once her efforts would be seen. She was wrong. The reading happened 3 days after the funeral in their father's dusty old study, where everything still smelled like cedar and pipe smoke. The lawyer, Mr. Renshaw, was an old family friend. When he walked in holding the envelope, Nora could already see the apology in his eyes. Grace arrived late, breezy as ever, with red lacquered nails and no trace of mascara smudged from crying. She greeted the lawyer like they were meeting for lunch at a golf club, then sat down beside Nora with the air of someone certain she'd already won. Renshaw cleared his throat. "The estate, including the family home, liquid assets, and my business shares," he read, "are to be passed in full to my beloved daughter, Grace." Nora didn't even blink. She stared straight ahead, her breath shallow, her fingers tightening around the chair's armrest. The room seemed to spin as she tried to understand. Not a word about the last 8 years she'd spent helping him bathe, cooking him meals, watching him deteriorate. Not even the car, which had her name on the insurance. Grace, meanwhile, was already sipping her celebratory latte. "I'm sorry, Nora," Renshaw mumbled, folding the will with slow regret. She stood up, not trusting herself to speak. Her face was calm, but behind her ribs, her heart thundered like a war drum. Grace had always been their father's favorite. But favoritism alone didn't explain this. Something was wrong. 2 days later, she found it. An email, buried deep in her father's old laptop, a draft that was never sent. The subject line read, "Updated will for review." The date on it was 6 months ago. The attached PDF had her name on everything: the house, the money, the business. A note below, "Grace needs to grow up. Nora has earned every inch of this." But that wasn't the version read in the study. That wasn't what the lawyer had. Nora sat back in her father's chair, her throat dry, a cold clarity sliding down her spine. She didn't know what Grace had done to make that version disappear, but she was going to find out. And when she did, there'd be no going back. Nora sat motionless, save for the subtle twitch in her jaw. The words of the email echoed in her skull like a heartbeat she couldn't silence. Grace needs to grow up. Nora has earned every inch of this. Her father had written that. Her father. And yet the will they all heard 3 days ago had carved her out like a forgotten memory. She forwarded the draft will to herself, then slipped the laptop back into its case. Her hands were cold, but steady now. Rage did that, made the body focused, made the air feel thinner, and the world suddenly very, very clear. Grace had changed the will. She had to have. But how? Later that afternoon, Nora drove across town to visit someone she hadn't seen since high school, Matt Linwood, the boy who used to copy her math homework and, years later, ended up in digital forensics for the state police. They met at a coffee shop tucked beside a laundromat, both too out of the way and too honest for Grace to ever step foot inside. Matt was already there, sipping black coffee like it was whiskey. "I got your message," he said, looking her over. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again unless you were organizing a reunion or a heist." Nora slid the laptop across the table. Maybe both. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing as he powered it on. I need to know who last accessed this file, or deleted anything, if it was tampered with, she added. I think someone replaced our father's real will. Matt frowned as he worked, fingers flying across the keys. You know, there are legal channels for this. She shook her head. Not when the lawyer reading the will is her godfather. Grace's, not mine. There was a beat of silence before he nodded once, slowly. It took him less than 15 minutes to find the logs. Nora, he said carefully, turning the screen toward her, your instincts were right. A document labeled lastwillfinal.pdf had been accessed 2 months ago, then deleted, then replaced with one titled Last Will Signed Grace Version.pdf, just 2 days before their father went into the hospital for the last time. The user? A USB drive. No identifiable owner, but the access happened while the laptop was connected to the Wi-Fi at Grace's apartment. You think she forged it? Matt asked, leaning in, low-voiced. Nora stared at the screen. I don't think. I know. That evening, Nora sat parked outside Grace's condo, her hands tight on the steering wheel, watching the third-story window glow a warm amber. Inside, Grace moved about freely, mascara perfect, world unbothered, likely sipping wine and basking in her victory. She had gotten away with it once. Nora wouldn't let her do it again. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Matt. Found metadata traces in the replaced PDF. It was signed digitally. But the certificate isn't from your dad. It's registered to Grace's laptop, not his. Evidence. Real, tangible forensic evidence. But she couldn't go to court yet. Not without understanding the full scope. Grace had her godfather on her side, and Nora didn't trust the legal path. Not while Grace still wore her angel mask in front of the world. No, if Nora was going to win, she needed to dismantle her sister's image first. Slowly, precisely, publicly. The first step was the storage unit. Her father's old business paperwork, personal letters, and the original copy of the signed will. They had to be somewhere. Grace had insisted on boxing everything herself after the funeral, then told Nora there was nothing worth keeping, except the safe documents she gave to Renshaw. Nora called the storage company that evening. She posed as Grace. She'd memorized her sister's old phone number, her birthday, even the pet name their dad used for her on official files. 10 minutes later, she had the access code and address. A quiet storage facility in a gated lot on the edge of the city. Her chest tightened as she drove, the night pressing against the windshield like an omen. Inside the unit, it smelled like cardboard and dust, and something faintly floral, her father's cologne, trapped in the fabric of an old coat. She ran her fingers along the stacked boxes, heart in her throat. And there it was. A narrow, fireproof box labeled Estate Docs, Original/Private. The lock was basic. She snapped it with a metal nail file. Inside were dozens of documents, insurance papers, stock certificates, even handwritten letters addressed to her. But near the bottom, her hand stopped. A printed will, blue ink signature, dated 6 months ago, the same version as the one in the email. She stepped back, eyes wide, pulse thrumming. If Grace had known this still existed, it wouldn't be here. That meant she wasn't as careful as she thought. She assumed Nora wouldn't dig. And that was Grace's biggest mistake. Outside the storage unit, Nora zipped her jacket, clutching the folder like a heartbeat against her chest. Her sister had lied, forged, deleted, buried the truth. Now it was her turn to start digging it back up. Not in silence, but with strategy. And she knew exactly where to start. The next morning, Nora didn't go to work. She called in, voice calm but unreadable, and then sat at the kitchen table with the storage box spread before her like a battlefield map. The real will, signed in blue ink with their father's signature unmistakable. The same handwriting that had filled her birthday card since she was 7. The same loop on the letter R that used to drive him crazy when he thought his pen was running dry. She read every line again, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to feel it. The quiet justice her father had tried to leave her. The home she had cared for. The life she had pressed pause on. All acknowledged in black and white, Grace's name barely mentioned. But the world didn't run on paper alone, not anymore. To beat Grace, it wasn't enough to have the truth. Nora had to show it, in a way that couldn't be buried, deleted, or rewritten. She picked up her phone and called the one person in their family who still believed Grace walked on water. Their Aunt Darlene. "You know, I always thought it was strange that your father left you out of the will," Darlene said, her voice filtered through the scratchy speakerphone of her landline. "I mean, he loved Grace, sure, but you were his caregiver." Nora kept her tone steady. "I found a copy of another will, Aunt Dee. It's signed, dated, stored in Dad's private safe box, and Grace made sure no one saw it." Silence. Then a sharp breath. "Are you accusing her of forgery?" "I'm accusing her of fraud," Nora said flatly, "and I'm asking if you'd be willing to take a look at something with me. Proof. I just want another set of eyes before I take the next step." Darlene agreed. By sunset, she was sitting in Nora's living room, glasses perched on the edge of her nose, carefully inspecting every document. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. "Grace is clever, Nora, but she's sloppy when she's arrogant." That night, Darlene offered more than advice. She handed Nora a flash drive. "She sent me this 6 months ago," she said. "A video of her and your dad at lunch. I didn't think much of it at the time, just her usual bragging. But now, watch this." Nora opened the file. The footage was grainy, shot from Grace's phone. She was filming her plate, a steak, a fancy cocktail, then slowly panned across the table. Their father was there, frail, distracted, flipping through a folder she slid toward him. "Just sign there, Daddy," Grace's voice cooed from behind the camera. "I already filled out everything. You just have to add your name." The old man smiled faintly, clearly confused. "Which one is it again?" She laughed. "Don't worry, it's the final one. Just sign the bottom." He scribbled something, then handed the folder back. The screen went black. Nora froze. Her fingers trembled around the edge of the laptop. She replayed the audio twice, 3 times, heart pounding harder each time. He didn't know what he was signing. The next day, she printed transcripts from the video, assembled the 2 versions of the will, and had Matt create a time-stamped forensic report on the document metadata. Then she emailed one clean copy of everything to Renshaw, the lawyer who had read the fraudulent will. Subject line: urgent, misrepresentation of estate, legal evidence enclosed. No emotion, just facts. She wanted him to know she wasn't bluffing, but she didn't wait for a reply. Instead, she booked an appointment with the local notary office and had all her evidence verified, time-stamped, and stored in both physical and digital vaults. And then, she uploaded the video to a private YouTube link, unlisted but accessible to anyone with the URL. She had no intention of keeping this quiet. If Grace had taught her anything, it was that image was everything. And now, Grace's carefully curated one was about to unravel. Grace called the next morning. Nora didn't pick up. Instead, she let it go to voicemail. Her sister's voice poured out sweet as syrup, but cracked at the edges. "Hey, Nori. I think there's been some confusion. Renshaw called me last night, and he sounded kind of panicked. You didn't really send him some fake old will and say I deleted the real one, did you? I mean, let's just talk about this, okay? No need to make things ugly. Call me." Click. Nora smiled, teeth clenched. Ugly had already happened. Grace just hadn't realized the mirror was turning. That evening, she opened her laptop and clicked send on the link. She didn't send it to Grace. She sent it to everyone Grace had manipulated. Their mother's old friends, family members who once whispered Nora was too uptight, even the board members of their father's business, whom Grace had tried to impress at the funeral. No captions, no commentary, just a title. Lunch with Grace, the will signing you weren't supposed to see. Let the image crack on its own. Let the silence make the sound louder. By sunrise, Nora's phone was on fire. Text after text, missed calls, DMS from distant cousins she hadn't heard from in years. Even her estranged Uncle Louis, who once called her cold and bitter like her mother, sent a 2-word message at 6:12 a.m. "I'm sorry." She didn't respond. She sat quietly in the kitchen, barefoot, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the sharp click of each new notification. Outside, the day began like any other: birdsong, garbage trucks, a lawnmower whining somewhere down the block. But inside her phone, her sister's image was shattering like sugar glass. The video was spreading. The comments under the private link were devastating. A controlled leak among the family circuit. He clearly didn't understand. That wasn't a signature. That was manipulation. Grace always had a way of getting what she wanted. But this? If Nora had done this, we'd have crucified her. She hadn't said a word, just sent the footage. That was enough. By noon, Renshaw called. This time, Nora answered. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice lower, more cautious than before. "I received your documents, and I have to say I'm deeply troubled." "You should be," she replied evenly. "You read a fraudulent will, Mr. Renshaw, in a room full of witnesses. A will that your goddaughter replaced with a forged digital file." There was a heavy pause. "I was told by Grace that it was an updated version," he muttered, a trace of shame slipping in. "That your father had changed his mind before his final stay in the hospital." "I have the forensic logs, the deleted file, the original printed and signed copy, the storage unit access receipts, a sworn affidavit from Aunt Darlene, and the video." She leaned back. "That's not confusion. That's conspiracy." Renshaw sighed, gravelly and pained. "Would you allow me to meet you in person, Nora? I want to correct this before it gets worse." She let him stew in the silence before answering. "You've got 24 hours, and I want your signature on a notarized statement admitting the wrong version was read." Grace didn't stay silent for long. At 3:23 p.m. she showed up, uninvited. Nora spotted her through the peephole, wrapped in a trench coat like she was about to be cast in a courtroom drama, large sunglasses hiding eyes that had probably cried all morning. Nora opened the door just wide enough. Grace took them off slowly, revealing a face red and raw, but still dripping with practiced innocence. "I know what you're doing," she said softly. "You're trying to ruin me." Nora leaned against the doorframe. "No, Grace, you ruined yourself. I'm just making sure people see it." "I was scared," Grace whispered. "You don't know what it was like, watching Dad pick you over and over again, like I didn't exist, like I was just the decoration daughter. He never loved me like he loved you." For a split second, something in Nora softened, but then she remembered the empty bank accounts, the sale papers Grace had already drawn up for the house, the smug smile on her sister's face during the will reading. "You know what scared people don't do?" Nora replied. "They don't commit fraud. They don't fake legal documents. They don't lie to their own blood and bury their father's final wishes." Grace's tears stilled. "You've always wanted to be the good one," she said bitterly. "Now you get to be the victim, too." Nora didn't flinch. "Number I get to be the truth." She closed the door before Grace could answer. That night, Nora received a folder from Matt, one final piece to the puzzle. Digital signature traces tied directly to Grace's personal login. Timestamps matching her travel logs. A paper trail. But tucked into the folder was something else, a recording. "I was running a recovery on old audio backups," Matt explained in his message. "Found this in your dad's voice memos. It's from 3 weeks before he died." Nora pressed play. "Note to myself, I think Grace is hiding something. She brought me some papers last week. Told me to sign, said they were for the hospice pre-arrangements, but I don't remember the hospice needing my business shares. Need to talk to Nora. She'll know." Nora froze, tears rising but not falling. Her father had known. Even in his confusion, something inside him had resisted. She didn't realize she was crying until she tasted salt. The next morning, Nora stood outside the lawyer's office, folder in hand. Not to beg, not to plead, but to reclaim. She stepped inside, ready to confront the man who had once looked at her like a background character in her own family. This time she wasn't background. She was the storm. Renshaw looked smaller than Nora remembered. He sat behind his mahogany desk in that same stuffy office where he'd once read a lie with conviction. The air smelled of leather and shame. Nora walked in without waiting for an invitation, her folder tucked neatly under her arm. No anger in her expression, just resolve so sharp it could slit paper. Renshaw stood, then slowly sat again when she didn't offer a handshake. "I assume you've come to present the originals in person," he said. "I'm here for your statement," she replied coolly. "Signed, notarized, admitting you read an invalid will to the family and that a revised, fraudulent version was submitted to you by Grace Carter, under false pretenses." The man rubbed his temples. "You don't understand how much damage this could do to my reputation." "No," she interrupted. "You don't understand how much damage it already did to mine. You helped strip me of everything my father left for me, and you did it blindly because you trusted Grace to be a better person than she is." Renshaw hesitated, but the weight of the folder Nora dropped on the desk. Physical documents, metadata reports, recovered audio files, silenced any attempt at self-preservation through denial. After a long silence, he finally exhaled. "I'll draft it," he said, "but I want one thing." Nora raised an eyebrow. "I want to tell the family myself." She paused, thought carefully, then nodded once. "Fine. You have 24 hours. Later that day, Grace disappeared, vanished from her apartment. Her phone went straight to voicemail. Her Instagram went dark. No flights under her name, no charges on her usual credit cards. But Nora knew her sister well enough to guess. Grace had run. Because Grace never stayed to face anything when the consequences turned real. She simply vanished into the wind and reappeared when she could spin the story her way. But this time, there was no version of events she could paint prettier. There were too many receipts, too many eyes watching. That evening, Nora visited her childhood home. Technically, it still belonged to Grace under the fraudulent will, but after the signed statement Renshaw gave her and the real, notarized copy of their father's intentions, that house was a ticking time bomb. The lights inside were off. The silence felt deeper than grief. She wandered through the front hallway, the scent of lavender and pipe smoke still clung to the air. She passed the faded photos on the walls, pausing at one, her father, her, and Grace. Grace had her arms folded, even as a child. Nora had a bandage on her knee. Their dad stood between them, arms around them both, a proud but exhausted look on his face. He'd tried to love them equally, but Grace never wanted equal. She wanted it all. In the dining room, Nora found the papers Grace had prepared, listings from 3 real estate agents, all with her name and signature. She'd been ready to sell the house out from under her before the ink had even dried on the fake will. Nora snapped photos of every page. Evidence. Just in case Grace tried to reappear with a new version of events and a fresh tan. The next morning, Renshaw made good on his word. He called a family meeting, a video call, mandatory attendance, to correct a tragic misunderstanding. Nora didn't say a word as Renshaw spoke. He explained how Grace had brought him a digitally signed file under the guise of an urgent change made by their father. He admitted he hadn't verified it, that he hadn't asked questions, that he had let bias cloud his duty, and that Nora was, in fact, the rightful heir, as per the real, signed, dated, and stored will their father had intended. There was silence after, then murmurs, a few muttered apologies, an audible gasp from Aunt Darlene when Renshaw mentioned the video of the manipulated signing. Then Uncle Louis again, blunt and brutal. She conned him, and she almost got away with it. By the end of the call, Nora had only one thing left to do. She forwarded the updated documents to the probate court. Attached the affidavit, the video, and Renshaw's signed correction. The clerk called within 2 hours. "You're in the right," the woman said kindly. "It'll take time to undo the probate claim filed by your sister, but we'll restore what's yours. And if you're considering pressing criminal charges, the DA's office would certainly take interest." Nora ended the call with one word, "Not yet." She wasn't finished. That night she received an email. No name, no subject line, just a burner address and a single sentence in the message body. "You think this is over, But I still have one more card. No signature, no clue. But she didn't need one. Nora stared at the screen, her spine straightening, her jaw tightening. Grace hadn't vanished. She was plotting, and whatever that last card was, Nora would be ready. She read it once, then again. Then she stared at it in silence for several minutes, letting her sister's cryptic threat hang in the air like a storm that refused to break. You think this is over, but I still have one more card. Whatever card Grace had left, it had to be desperate. Nora had already exposed the fraud, reclaimed the real will, and submitted everything to the probate court. She'd received confirmation just days before. The house was officially hers. The business shares were being transferred. And Grace, for the first time in her life, had been publicly cornered with no glamorous spin to escape through. But this was Grace. She didn't know how to lose. 2 days passed before the card revealed itself. A letter arrived at Nora's doorstep, hand-delivered, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a photocopy of a document Nora had never seen, an old medical power of attorney, dated nearly a year ago. Her father's signature scrawled at the bottom, and Grace's name at the top. Attached to it was a note, written in Grace's familiar handwriting. Dad trusted me with more than just the will, Nori. Did you ever wonder why I had access to his laptop, his doctors, his estate plans? It's not fraud when he chose me. Maybe he changed his mind in the end. Maybe he didn't want a bitter little nurse watching over him. Think about that the next time you hang your victory on a technicality. Gee. Nora read it twice. Her hands didn't shake. She calmly picked up the letter, walked to her scanner, and digitized the whole thing. Then she called Matt. Within hours, they had proof. The signature on the power of attorney didn't match her father's known records. Not even close. Sloppy work. Lazy even. It had been doctored. Another desperate attempt to undermine the truth Nora had already secured. But it wasn't the forged signature that hit Nora the hardest. It was the tone, that cold, pointed bitterness. Maybe he didn't want a bitter little nurse watching over him. Nora hadn't expected an apology. Not from Grace, not ever. But reading those words, feeling how low Grace would stoop, even after losing, carved something deeper than the legal betrayals ever had. Because it was a final admission of who Grace really was. Not the polished, favored daughter, not the grieving sister, just a scared, manipulative woman who couldn't stand the idea of not being adored. Nora didn't press charges, not yet. She gave Grace one last courtesy. She sent back the letter, attached with Matt's forensic report, and a short note of her own. You've been seen. Every lie, every forged signature, every attempt to rewrite the past. This time, I'm not cleaning up your mess. And this time, you don't get to disappear without the truth following you. 3 months later, the house was hers in full. She walked through the garden that spring, hands brushing against the lavender her father used to plant every year. The porch creaked under her step the way it always had, but now it sounded like home again. Not memory, not grief, not betrayal. Just hers. Inside, she'd painted the walls a soft cream, pulled the dusty curtains down, and filled the rooms with light. Her name was finally on the deed. Her father's voice, the one from the recovered voicemail, was saved on a little digital recorder she kept in the nightstand. She played it sometimes, not for proof anymore, but for peace. The last message she got from Grace was a blank email. No words, just a photo attachment, a blurry snapshot of some beachfront in Mexico, the corner of a drink visible in the foreground. No caption, no smile, just the illusion of freedom. Nora stared at it for a second, then hit delete. Some victories aren't loud. They don't come with parades or applause or courtroom speeches. Some victories come in silence, in knowing you were right, in reclaiming what was stolen without turning into the thing that took it, in choosing to live without bitterness, even when someone else tried to poison you with theirs. That night, Nora sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the stars. The house was quiet again. But this time it wasn't grief. It was grace, the real kind. The kind you choose. The end.